This is a simple and beautiful guide on human growth. So the key principle is that practical growth gives us freedom to focus on higher forms of growth. Ultimately, human growth is interconnected. You grow by experiencing, integrating, and sometimes by letting go. But across every domain, there are a few recurring laws that tend to occur. The first one is consistency beats intensity. Another one is that feedback beats fantasy. Discomfort is often the tuition for growth. And also you need to progressively increase your challenges. Also, integration matters more than accumulation, and don't sacrifice one dimension of yourself indefinitely for another. Now let's go domain by domain, starting with physical growth. The most important lesson here is to treat the body as something to develop and maintain, not something to exploit. Progress comes from basic things done repeatedly, like adequate sleep, nourishing food, movement, cardiovascular fitness, recovery, and medical care. The mistake is looking for dramatic transformations instead of building a body that can reliably support your life. And how do you make good progress in this? I want you to think stimulus, right? Recovery, then adaptation. Then you repeat. You challenge yourself enough to stimulate adaptation, then give yourself enough recovery for adaptation to occur. A person doesn't become physically capable just because they destroy themselves in the gym. They become capable because they repeatedly train, recover, and then return. What are some of the traps here? The first is all or nothing thinking. If you think, I missed 3 workouts, so I've failed. No, it doesn't work like that. You need to simply resume. The second is having your appearance replacing your health. You can become obsessed with looking a certain way while becoming psychologically miserable. Another one is overtraining. More isn't automatically better. Then also neglect, where some people pursue intellectual or financial growth while treating sleep, movement, and health as inconveniences. Another one is short-term optimization, constantly searching for the perfect diet or supplement or routine or hacks instead of doing the boring fundamentals. So the next one is intellectual growth, right? And the most important lesson here is don't confuse consuming information with becoming more intelligent. You can read 100 books and remain intellectually shallow. Real intellectual growth means becoming better at distinguishing truth from nonsense and asking better questions and changing your mind. Being able to connect apparently unrelated ideas, explaining complicated things in a simple way, and solving increasingly difficult problems. So how do you make good progress in this? You can use a cycle. You learn, question, apply, explain, then receive correction, and then revise. Don't merely read about economics, for example. Learn an idea, ask whether you actually understand it, apply it in a real situation when you can, then try explaining it without looking at your notes. The traps include information addiction, intellectual vanity, wanting to appear intelligent rather than being willing to discover. Then when you're wrong, also not wanting to be corrected. Knowing little about something and then forming like a grand worldview around it, that's also a mistake. Complexity worship, like assuming an idea is profound because it is difficult to understand, and becoming a collector rather than a thinker. You find your bookshelf grows while your abilities don't. The goal isn't to just know more. Then emotional growth, which of course may be one of the most important forms of growth. The most important lesson here is you don't become emotionally mature by eliminating difficult emotions. Become mature by becoming capable of experiencing them without being ruled by them. Fear can exist without controlling you. Sadness can exist without becoming your identity. Anxiety can exist without dictating every decision of yours. So how do you make good progress in this domain, right? You learn to do 3 things. The first one is to notice, the second is to allow, and then to choose. There is space between feeling and action. That space is emotional maturity. The traps in this include avoidance, like too much entertainment, compulsive work, substances, scrolling, compulsive relationships, and anything that continually prevents you from sitting with yourself. Then emotional suppression and thinking, I shouldn't be feeling this. because you can't reliably choose which emotions enter your nervous system. Then, of course, emotional indulgence, which is the opposite mistake, thinking that I feel it, therefore it must be true. Then intellectualizing, which is a subtle one because it involves understanding your emotions brilliantly while never actually allowing yourself to experience them. So it's in the abstract. And making your emotions your identity is also a problem. So feel everything, but obey selectively. Another one is social growth. The most important lesson in this domain being that relationships improve when you become increasingly capable of understanding people without losing yourself in that. Social maturity isn't simply being charismatic, but also, learning how to listen, how to communicate, how to disagree, how to apologize, and even how to set boundaries. And how do you make good progress in this? You pay attention to people. The traps include people pleasing, avoiding, not being honest because you need everyone to like you, unnecessary dominance, like thinking social strength means controlling people, isolation, convincing yourself that you don't need anyone because relationships are difficult, and also validation addiction. So become neither submissive nor domineering. And then moral growth is about becoming someone that you can respect. The most important lesson here being that your character is built by what you repeatedly do. When there is a cost to doing something, how do you act? It's easy to have values, it's harder to pay for them. Honesty becomes meaningful and matters even more when lying would benefit you. Courage becomes meaningful when cowardice would be easier. Generosity becomes meaningful when keeping everything would benefit you. So how do you make good progress in this? Periodically, you have to ask, what kind of person am I repeated actions turning me into? Not what kind of person do I believe I am, because your behavior is the evidence. The traps include moral grandstanding, talking endlessly about principles while behaving poorly, self-righteousness, tribal morality, being compassionate towards your group, but being cruel towards everyone else. Character is not an image, it's a pattern. Then there is financial and practical growth. The most important lesson here being that money is primarily a tool for increasing your ability to act. It's not a substitute for meaning. Financial growth involves learning to earn, to save, to manage, to invest, to develop valuable skills and create useful things. So how do you make good progress in this? First, you become financially stable. Then you become financially capable. Then potentially become financially independent. Don't jump immediately to fantasies of enormous wealth while neglecting basic competence. First, get your money in order. The traps include lifestyle inflation, where every increase in income immediately becomes an increase in spending. Another one is status competition, like buying things primarily to communicate something about yourself. Get rich quick thinking, and also the desire for extraordinary outcomes without extraordinary competence. Thinking that making money is a scorecard of human worth is also another one. And it is particularly dangerous because you can become richer while becoming poorer in almost every other dimension. Never forget that. Also optimization without living, where you use money to buy symbols of success instead of freedom. And then there is experiential growth. The most important lesson here being that experience only becomes wisdom when it is processed. Two people can go through the same experience, and one becomes wiser while the other simply becomes, older. The difference here is reflection between the two people. And how do you make good progress in this? After significant experience, ask yourself, what happened? What did I believe beforehand? What surprised me? What did I contribute to the outcome? And what would I do differently? The traps in this include novelty addiction, constantly seeking new experiences because ordinary life feels insufficient, romanticizing suffering, don't merely live more, digest what you live. Then there's another area of human growth called creativity, and it deserves its own category because the most important lesson is that creativity grows through production, not merely through inspiration. You become creative by making things, bad things, awkward things, unoriginal things, and then eventually better things. So how you make good progress in this is that you consume, you imitate, you experiment, you create, and then you receive feedback and refine. A beginner shouldn't demand like absolute originality immediately. No, you first learn the language of the craft, then you start recombining what you have learned. Eventually, something recognizably yours will emerge. The traps include perfectionism, because really you become good enough at anything by creating. Inspiration dependence, that's another one. Waiting until you feel inspired. Comparison, you compare your early work to someone's 10th year. And also novelty obsession. So in this area, quantity creates the possibility of quality. Then spiritual growth, which is perhaps the deepest category. The most important lesson here being that eventually you have to learn how to live without requiring reality to give you everything you want. You will encounter uncertainty, disappointment, limitation, loss, aging, mortality, things you cannot control. So develop the capacity to live honestly despite unanswered questions. How do you make good progress in this? You learn to distinguish what you can control from what you cannot control. Learn to tolerate uncertainty. Spend time without stimulation. Develop values that don't depend entirely on success. The traps include nihilism, grand purpose obsession, believing you need one enormous cosmic mission before ordinary life can become meaningful, escaping life, trying to transcend human existence rather than learning how to inhabit it. Does that ring a bell? And cynicism also. So you don't have to solve existence to participate meaningfully in it. How about that? And then there is the integration part. So a person might be intellectually brilliant but emotionally immature, wealthy or rich but physically fragile. They may be socially charismatic but morally very unreliable. They may be spiritually sophisticated but incomplete and incompetent. So what kind of human being are you becoming across the whole system? Then there's growth of capacity, which means becoming more capable in strength, knowledge, skill, money, creativity, and influence. Then there's growth of character, which means becoming better at using the capacities of wisdom, restraint, courage, compassion, and integrity. Growth of consciousness means becoming less blindly driven by your impulses and inherited assumptions. And ideally, capacity or character and consciousness all grow together. There is one trap that cuts across every single domain that is turning growth itself into another form of self-rejection. You start with, I want to become better, then quietly it becomes, I'm not acceptable until I become better. You spend your entire life trying to become worthy of living it. That's a trap as well. The simplest model I would give is that think of a human being as having 4 jobs: building or developing your abilities, feeling or becoming capable of experiencing your inner life, relating or learning how to love, cooperate, communicate, and belong, understanding or wisdom about yourself, other people, and reality. So the point of growth isn't to spend your entire life and existence preparing to become a person who finally gets to live. That's what that is about. Growth should make you more capable of participating in life and not more afraid of failing at it. So subscribe and check out Growthplace Premium. The link is in the description. Until next time.